Hey, how's it going, U.S. government students? This is about politics and parties. As you can see, this goes right along with Chapter 17, Section 1. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit some highlights with each slide. And whenever you need to pause it to complete your assignment, please feel free to do so. And so the emphasis is on political parties. And as you can see, too, I know you see in the top left here Republicans and Democrats symbolized by the donkey and the elephant. So we know a lot about them, and we'll learn a little bit more. But what you also may not realize is that here in the state of California, in fact, most other states too, there are other political parties that are valid and recognized as well that you will see on the ballot on election day. That includes the American Independent Party, the Peace and Freedom Party, the Green Party, and the Libertarian Party. So there's not two in the state of California, there are six. We'll talk about some of these other types of third parties as well, their contributions, why they aren't successful. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the history of political parties in the United States and how it came to be the Republicans and Democrats at the top of the heap. So the first thing I want to do is just quickly go over the definition of politics. It's one of those terms that I know you know, but it's hard to just define off the top of your head. There's a couple different ways I can do that as well. So I'll give you the simple, straightforward definition that comes right out of the book, which is this. It is an effort to control or influence government policy. Now, anytime in this class you hear the word policy, we're talking about decisions. If something is political, it has to do with either controlling government decisions, heck, maybe even making them, or influencing the people who ultimately are making the decisions. So that is politics. You know, a great example from the cartoon is the process by which we select candidates to be the nominees in a presidential election. That is a political process. You are trying to be the nominee of your party to be elected president, to be one of the main decision makers in our government. And so, as you can see from the cartoon, a lot of Republicans in 2016 wanted to be the nominee of their party. That included Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, John Kasich, Jeb. You see him there as well. And of course, to their dismay, it wasn't any of them. It was Donald Trump who came out on top. And we'll briefly go over a little bit later on in this class that process of how he was able to do it. It's kind of a complex process involving 50 states doing 50 different things. But the bottom line for where we are right now is it was a political process. And so the next definition I want you to be aware of is the definition for political parties. And I know, again, obviously you know what political parties are, but the definition itself is real important to understand. There's some real key points of emphasis here that would define it here in the United States a little bit differently than you would define it in other countries. And so here's just the straight up definition: a group of people with broad common interests who seek to organize to win elections, control government, and make policy. It is all about that end game right here. Why are political parties formed? Ultimately, so their group of people, the people that are part of their group, can make the decisions to run this country. It's all about making policy. That's why political parties exist. And so, how do you make policy? Well, let's go backwards here. You make policy by controlling the government. Whoever controls the government will be making all the decisions. Well, how do you control the government? Well, you got to win elections. You win elections, you control government, you make decisions. Well, how in the United States are you going to win elections? You're going to do that by having a group of people with broad common interests that are part of your party. I say broad common interests because with broad common interests, your tent gets much bigger. We have in the United States what we call the big tent theory, particularly as it pertains to the two main parties, where sure, the Republican Party stands for certain principles, limited government, low taxation, pure capitalism, etc. But on some very specific issues, as Republicans, they can disagree. For example, the Republican Party is officially pro-life opposed to abortion. That's not to say they just ban anyone who's pro-choice from joining the Republican Party. They wouldn't do that because you want as many people as possible. So you might say on very specific issues, say the abortion issue, we might disagree, but you still agree with our broad principles. We still want you as part of the group. If they decided to shut out every single Republican who happened to be pro-choice out of the party and say, no, we don't want you. Well, you've just lost millions of potential voters, and you don't want that. You lose millions of potential voters, you're not winning elections, you're not controlling government, you're not making policy. So we have that big tent theory in an effort to win. But you also got to be careful, because if the tent gets too big, then it's like, well, what do we really stand for if we're just going to allow anyone and everyone, regardless of their beliefs? And so that's kind of the balance that political parties have to strike. And even within political parties, there's groups or factions that exist. Case in point, supporters of Joe Biden during the primary season in 2020 were not the same people that were supporting Bernie Sanders. They sit on different, parts of the political spectrum. They didn't see eye to eye. Sure, they are all Democrats, but generally speaking, the Bernie Sanders supporters were much more progressive, much more liberal than, generally speaking, the Joe Biden supporters. So how do you bring them together after the nominee is selected? That is the trick. It'll be really interesting to see if Joe Biden can still attract those supporters, of Bernie Sanders going back to the primary season. It's not easy to do. So functions of political parties. Here's what political parties do. One, they elect candidates. They select people to run in these elections. I talked about the primary process being one where voters of the party select who they think the nominee should be. And at the end of the process, someone comes up. And frankly, political parties, this is key. You want to find quality people, because if you don't, you're not going to win. And some years are better than others. I think for all intents and purposes, 2016, you saw a battle between two, fairly weak candidates. They both had a lot of baggage, both had some things seriously working against them. And so, it wasn't like you had five-star General Dwight Eisenhower on the ticket. That didn't exist. That being said, it doesn't matter. It's all about winning. And Donald Trump won in the Electoral College and Hillary Clinton didn't. But you obviously want to find the best candidates possible. Educating the public and involving people is a big one as well, too. And I think parties do a good job of this. A lot of the information stuff we learn about in terms of government and politics and the candidates, it's all coming from the political parties. A lot of the commercials you see on television, a lot of the mailers, and heck, if you want to get involved in an election, guaranteed the political parties say, come on in. We will give you something to do. You can be making phone calls. You can be knocking on doors. You can be using social media. There's lots of ways you can get involved through the political party apparatus. They're really good at that. And of course, developing policy operating the government. Through their elected officials, political parties want their philosophy, their agenda, their platform implemented into actual policy decisions being made. Again, that is the end game. Dispensing patronage is another one. That has to do with what Andrew Jackson referred to as the spoils system, going all the way back to the 1820s and 30s. To the victor go the spoils. Fact of the matter is, political parties take care of their own, so that when one of their candidates win, they bring in a bunch of people that belong to the party to help them run the government or make decisions. So it wasn't a surprise that once Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, all of a sudden, a lot of Democrats working at the White House just became unemployed. He's not going to ask them to stay on. A bunch of Democrats get removed. He brings a bunch of his Republican supporters in, and it's about loyalty. It's like, hey, you helped me get elected. I'm going to reward you with this ambassadorship. I'm going to reward you with this post in the Oval Office, so on and so forth. And if Joe Biden's elected in January, guaranteed, there's a lot of Republicans now, unemployed that are leaving the White House. So patronage is kind of, rewarding the party faithful, taking care of your own. And they do that with jobs, contracts, etc. Government watchdog, too. Think of this as like checks and balances. The political parties do a very good job of watching one another. Guarantee you, if the Republicans who control the Senate, screw up somehow, some way, the Democrats that control the House are going to let us know. They're not going to keep it a secret. If the Democrats in the House do something that they're ashamed of or that they shouldn't, don't worry about it being kept a secret. You're going to have President Trump, a Republican, or the Republican-led Senate call them out on it. So they do a good job of that as well, too. Providing stability as well. Parties do create some sort of stability where, heck, even if you don't know anything about a candidate, just the fact that they're a Republican or Democrat, already gives you some information about where you think they stand on the issues, where they are in the political spectrum, especially the two-party system. If you want stability, the two-party system says, hey, it's either going to be this group or this other group, but one of them will at least control this lever of government and make policy decisions at that lever. So I'm going to take you through a brief little history lesson of the political parties. And if you wanted to look for the word political party in the Constitution, you would not find it. In fact, a lot of the founding fathers referred to parties as factions and had very negative things to say about factions. James Madison famously writes that factions are, motivated by selfish interests, and they only care about themselves, and it's only about ambition, and they're willing to hurt others just to improve their party's lot or their faction's lot. Like, let's hope we have a country that doesn't have factions, because they unnecessarily divide us when we should be finding ways to unite. And of course, we didn't have parties for about a day, and then they came up real quick early on in American history. The first two that we saw, going back to 1796, taking us through 1812, were the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. So the Federalists were led by George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, believing in a strong national government, kind of an industrial economy, and an alliance with Great Britain. That was kind of their vision for America. Whereas you have the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, that favored more of power going to state governments, more of a rural farm-based economy, more of an alliance with France as opposed to Great Britain. So automatically you saw that divide. And both the parties had success in this time period. And then the War of 1812 came. And the Federalists, weren't supportive of it. The American people were ready to go against the British, and the Federalist Party ceased to be at that time. And so for the next roughly 4 election cycles, 16 years, you really only had one political party here in the United States, the Democratic Republican. So you had different candidates on the ballot and everything, but there really wasn't competing political parties. And this is the time of James Monroe. This is the time of John Quincy Adams. Now, everything does change in 1828. And the change had to do with one man, and that is who you see in that political cartoon resembling a monarch. That is Andrew Jackson, who was elected in 1828, reelected in 1832. Now, if you liked Andrew Jackson, if you supported Andrew Jackson, man of the people from the rugged frontier, a war hero, representing, the common man, you came to be what's known as a Democrat. Same political party that exists today. Totally different beliefs back then, same party. If you opposed Andrew Jackson, felt he was acting more like a king or a monarch than an actual, limited executive, felt he should be impeached, not put on the $20 bill, well, you were called the Whig Party. And they took their name from a party in England that opposed the monarch. And so there's where you see the divide. Democratic Republicans split into two over Andrew Jackson. By 1860, you see another political party form and have success in the 1860 election, and they forever become known as the Republican Party. We have the first Republican elected in 1860, that, of course, being Abraham Lincoln. Once he's elected, immediately we jump into southern states seceding and a civil war. So between 1860 and 1932, not only do we have the two main parties that we know today, but during the 72-year time period, we have one of these two political parties that totally dominate. And I'm sure if you can guess who's on the winning side of the Civil War, you can guess what party dominated national, state, and local for decades after that. And that, of course, was the Republican Party. And so I know there was exceptions that, Grover Cleveland, a Democrat, yeah, he won twice, so on and so forth. But those are the exceptions. The bottom line is the Republican Party did extremely well, between 1860 and 1932 at all levels of government. This was an era of Republican domination for sure. You see Lincoln there. You also see President Teddy Roosevelt, too, who was a Republican. Now, 1932, things change. We have the Great Depression, and the roaring 20s come to a grinding halt. The period of Republican domination comes to a halt with Herbert Hoover as well. And a new kind of mindset sweeps in, led by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 32. So you still have Republicans versus Democrats in this time window, but now all of a sudden things have changed. It is no longer the Republicans dominating the 30s, 40s, 50s, and the 60s. This is an era of Democratic domination for sure. Roosevelt, as you guys know, was elected in 32, then reelected in 36 and 40 and 44, and then Harry Truman takes over, another Democrat. You have Kennedy, you have Johnson this time period. And again, there were exceptions, Dwight Eisenhower being one of them. But of course, Eisenhower was a guy, again, hero of World War II. Who cares about political party affiliation? How could you not vote for Eisenhower in 52 and 56, given his resume? So, again, more of the exception to the rule. Fact is, Democrats controlled not only the presidency most of the time, they also controlled Congress, they also controlled state and local offices as well. And then we get to an interesting time period, which we'll say 1968 to the present. The question I always present to students in class is, okay, which political parties dominated since 1968? And some people say Republicans, and there's plenty of evidence, starting with our current president, President Trump, a Republican. You also have, anyone with the last name of Bush. That's George W. Bush for 2 terms, his father for 1 term. You got Reagan for 2 terms. You got Nixon elected to 2 terms. So that's a lot of Republican presidents, more so than the Democrats, Obama, Clinton, Carter, but I will say this, while we had a lot of Republican presidents, usually they were having to deal with the legislative branch that was controlled by the Democratic Party. And so when I asked the question of which party has truly dominated since 1968, the answer is really neither party. In fact, we have a name for this. We live in the era of divided government where no one party just absolutely dominates the show. Today is a classic example. Yes, Donald Trump is elected president as a Republican. Doesn't mean that no one's voting for the Democrats, because Hillary Clinton got 3 million more popular votes, so it wasn't exactly a blowout. And yeah, the Republicans control the Senate right now, but guess what? The Democrats control the House of Representatives. That is classic divided government where no one party dominates, and often you'll see like one party controlling one branch of government and then another party controlling another. And if you want to know why maybe there's more gridlock, things don't get accomplished, it's a lot maybe meaner, nastier, a lot more animosity. Part of it is due to the nature that we have 2 political parties that, every single election cycle are vying for power and are really close. It's like, I don't want to work with the other side. I don't want to give them an inch. I don't want them to get the credit. So I'm going to fight, like crazy to make sure they get nothing accomplished. And then we take over. Back when Roosevelt took over in 32 and 36, like everyone and their mother was a Democrat. So easy to get things accomplished when you have what's called unified government. And in a world of divided government, you're just going to have a lot more gridlock and stalemates. And so that is inevitable. And again, you can look at the past few years as a classic example of both Democrats and Republicans really going at it. So as far as the 2 main parties, I'm just going to give you, generally speaking, where they stand. Every 4 years, they come up with a party platform that says at the Republican or Democratic National Convention, here's where we are. Now, the Republicans did something I'm not sure they've ever done before. And for the 2020 Republican National Convention that took place this past summer, they decided not to draft a new platform of where they stand on issues and just say, we're going to use the 2016 one again, which was really interesting that they did that even in a pandemic. But so this is the same goes, and not surprising. Republican Party is about pursuing free market policies, more of a pure capitalist economy, getting the government out of the business of the economy. If you truly want to grow an economy, if you want Americans to prosper, it's not more government intervention, it is less. Lower taxes for everyone. The key to economic growth is not more taxes, it is less. And making them more fair, something like a flat tax where everyone's income is taxed at the same rate. And so they said, not only is that fair, but you don't need all these taxes. And it's not fair to take it from me just to give it to someone else who may or may not be deserving. And you kind of strangle the economy when you do that. People keeping more money in their pocket, that's the key to economic growth. Opposition to same-sex marriage, defining marriage between a man and a woman. That's the way it's always been, and that's the way it should continue to be. States' rights. If a government is going to have power, it needs to be more at the state level rather than the federal level. Instead of a one-size-fits-all policy for all 50 states, let individual states make decisions on what they want to do. Right to keep and bear arms, a Second Amendment fundamental right to keep and bear arms for self-defense, for recreation. It's not the government's job to come in, not something enshrined in the Second Amendment. Whether you like it or not, it is there. Pro-life too, opposed to abortion. And pose any sort of amnesty, any sort of, citizenship or path towards citizenship or waiving laws for anyone that is not in the country legally. When it comes to undocumented immigrants, Republicans have staunchly been, we need to, dissuade them from coming illegally. It's not fair. We have a fair process. They should wait in line like all the others. And, if we do find them, they should be deported. And if you keep offering them services like school, healthcare, et cetera, it's just incentive for more to come. And so it's all about the rule of law and making sure that people are getting in this country legally. And in part two, that way we know who they are as well. And again, generally what I just described, which we'll talk about ideology later, is a more conservative approach to governing. So, of course, the Democratic Party, kind of looking at it from a different lens, not less government intervention. You need to have government intervention in the economy. We tried pure capitalism, during the 1920s. It resulted in the Great Depression, which wasn't our first depression. It was like every generation there was a depression. People are sick of the roller coaster economy. People are sick of the times of bust and boom. You need the government to get in there. You need the Fed to get in there and to be able to, again, ensure a stable money supply, control inflation, create a situation for full employment. That can only happen with government intervention. Progressive income taxes, that it should be all about ability to pay. And the idea that a billionaire like Bill Gates should pay the same percentage or a lower percentage and someone make a minimum wage, Democrats say, is not okay. He should pay a higher percentage in taxes. And yeah, he's made a lot of money, great, high five, but he has the ability to pay more, he should. Support same-sex marriage. This isn't something that's been in the party platform forever. It wasn't until 2012 that the Democratic Party put this into the platform. But ever since then, they've officially been in support of same-sex marriage. And gun regulation. Not more guns in the hands of people, less guns. It needs to be regulated. This is not what the founding fathers intended when they talked about a well-regulated militia being necessary. So to keep and bear arms was part of the deal. We now have militaries to protect us. We have law enforcement. We don't need military-style assault weapons in the hands of ordinary citizens. If they want to play Army, there's, the service that they can enroll in and protect their country in the process. But all these guns just lead to more gun violence. Immigration reform. Fact of the matter is, Democrats say, immigrants are here. Yes, some of them are undocumented. In fact, millions are. And guess what? They aren't going anywhere. And the fact of the matter is, since you're not going to find them, you might as well make sure they're in school and getting a proper education, making sure that they're getting vaccinated and that they have access to health screenings. They are human beings after all anyways. And they say, too, the dirty little secret is they're doing a lot of the jobs no one else is willing to do. You go to those Central Valley farms that are making all the produce that we see at Stater Brothers, guess who's picking it? Guess who's doing all the hard work? It's a lot of undocumented immigrants, and they're not doing it for minimum wage. A lot of them are doing it for far less. So not only that, they're contributing to the American economy and American society as well, too. So we at least should be aware of that and come up with some sort of sensible reform. And that might include a path towards citizenship. Pro-choice, too. That is a woman's choice to make when it comes to what she decides to do or not do with her very own body. And generally, what I just described is a more liberal political philosophy. And so again, both sides agree on outcomes to make, America the best place possible. They disagree on kind of the path we should take to get there. So not only do we have the two main parties, but there's other types of parties as well, too. And I'm going to require you to do research on those as well as part of this unit. So we call them minor parties or third parties, and there's a few different types throughout history. First type of third party is what's referred to as a single issue party. It's a political party created that really just cares about one issue and one issue only. Prohibition is a great example going back to the 1800s, early 1900s. This was a political party concerned with banning the sale, manufacture, transportation, consumption of alcohol. Alcohol was the root of all evil. You get rid of that and you solve a lot of societal problems. So that was really their focus and their focus only. We've seen some anti-slavery parties in the early 1800s too, a single issue, the one thing they care about. Generally, what we tend to see nowadays is something that's more of what we call ideological. An ideological party is just a party that has beliefs on all the issues. They have a stance on abortion and the death penalty and taxes and same-sex marriage, etc. And so the Socialist Party is an example of an ideological party. It's about overall change, beliefs on all the issues. In fact, the Republicans and Democrats, too, of course, are ideological. It's not one issue they care about. They care about a bunch of different issues. Last type of third party is what's known as a splinter party. A splinter party, just like a splinter, something that kind of comes off a piece of wood, is in this case, it's split off of one of the two main parties. There is a group that is dissatisfied with the direction one of the two main parties is taking. So they split off and form their own political party. The great example would be 1912 and the Bull Moose Party, which was technically known as the Progressive Party. So Teddy Roosevelt, long life Republican, stops being president in 1908. William Howard Taft wins as a Republican. Then in 1912, Roosevelt decides, I want to be president again. But Taft's running for re-election. The Republican Party says we're sticking with Taft. So, Teddy Roosevelt, very upset about it, splinters off, forms his own party in 1912, and that was known as the Bull Moose Party. And so we've seen those throughout history as dissatisfied group. Generally, they aren't successful. In fact, usually what they do is just split up the vote between their new party and the party they used to belong to and allow the opposition to win. I would certainly make the argument no Bull Moose Party in 1912. I just don't see a path to victory for Democratic Woodrow Wilson, but the Republican Party split into two. And we'll cover that in just a moment. So why is it that third parties can't win? We always hear about Democrats and Republicans. Those are the ones that win. Why is it that these other ones can't? It's not that they don't have good ideas. You're going to be doing research on these parties, and I know there'll be at least one party out there that you see and you're like, wow, they have some good ideas. It's not that they don't have good ideas. I will say, our system is systematically shutting them out from ever having a chance of being successful. We can make it easier for them if we wanted to, but the people that control the government, i.e. Republicans and Democrats, do not want any more competition. So here are some of the obstacles that they face. One is third parties never get enough money to run a credible campaign here in the United States. In 2016, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump together raised over $1 billion. And that is not something third parties can compete with, because you have to go to corporations, individuals, union. You got to go to all these groups to get money. They're reluctant to give it to you because they don't think you're going to win. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have them raising over $1 billion combined, and then you have Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson raising $11 million in 2016. Dr. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, raising $3 million. $3 million can't compete with $600 million, which is what Hillary Clinton had. So they never have enough money. In other countries, they'll say, okay, you don't have to raise money from private people. The government's going to give every candidate an equal amount of cash, 5 weeks to campaign, go. That would certainly help third parties in the United States, but that's not our system. Just getting their name on the ballot is extremely tough. Republican and Democratic candidates automatically get their name on the ballot, no questions asked in all 50 states. For a third party candidate, you got to work at it. You usually have to get hundreds of thousands of people to sign a petition or to register with your party in a small window of time to make you eligible to have your name on a ballot in one of our 50 states. And if you're lucky enough to do that in one of our states, good luck. There's 49 other states and they have their own process for that. So I guarantee you, if their name's not on the ballot, no one's going to vote for them. They also have to tend to be ideologically extreme just to show that they're different from the two main parties. Because those two main parties have that big tent theory, Republicans and Democrats together gobble up a huge section of the political spectrum. Generally Republicans are middle of the political spectrum to right, conservative, and then Democrats, middle of the political spectrum, left, liberal. So where does that leave third parties? They have to go kind of further out on the spectrum, on the line, and be a little bit more extreme, which is fine. It shows that they're different, but there's not as many voters out there either. And when they come up with great ideas, guess what? The two main parties just take those ideas and make them their own. Lack of media attention is a huge one too, as you can see from this infographic. So and when it comes to how often the news actually talks about these third parties, I mean, just going back to 2016, between January 1st and August 31st, look at the amount of time covered covering Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton versus independent candidate Evan McMullin from Utah or Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, or the 3 seconds that Jill Stein got. The media just focuses on the two main parties. When you start seeing these debates between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in 2020, you're not going to see any third-party candidates up there. The media conglomerates that control these debates won't allow them on. They just want to focus on the two. Lastly, I know it's kind of a mouthful. It says single member district winner take all plurality elections, which is a fancy way of saying in the United States, we have a system of elections where generally one person wins and everyone else is a loser. Congress, Senate, presidents, and other countries, they do it a little bit differently. For example, for their parliament or their Congress, they'll hold nationwide elections. And if your party gets like 30% of the vote, well, then you get 30% representation in government. In our country, you get 30% of the vote in a House race or a Senate race. You get nothing to show for it. You get zero. So we have more of this winner take all system where you get the most votes, you win. If you don't, you're just a loser. And again, other countries don't do it quite like that. They allow you to build some momentum, have some representation in government, show what you can do. And now all of a sudden, it's like you can increase in your power and strength and numbers. So then why do these third party candidates do it? They know they can't win. They will not win a presidential election. No how, no way under the current system. And yet they still run. So why do they do that? Well, it does serve as a really effective safety valve for voter discontent. What happens when you're dissatisfied with the two main parties? It's like Heckle and Jekyll, candidate A, candidate B. I can't stand either. What do I do? The third party say, come vote for us. Come with us. We're a viable option. And you have seen kind of that safety valve option. When you don't like those two main choices, you have potentially millions of voters going and supporting the third party candidates, and they have in recent history won millions of votes because people, frankly, were dissatisfied with the two main candidates. They'll also emphasize issues the main parties will not. Sometimes you could argue if you're looking at problems in government, there's some collusion there, and Democrats don't have the answer, Republicans don't have the answer. Heck, you could argue sometimes both of them combined are part of the problem. And that's where third parties can step in and maybe say some of the things that the two main parties are too scared or too unwilling to. Ross Perot in 1992 was bringing up these economic issues and pointing the finger at both Republicans and Democrats. And frankly, a lot of people believed it. He got 1 in 5 voters in 1992 to vote for him. But he didn't win. In fact, out of 538 electoral votes, while he may have received 20% of the vote from the American people, he got 0 electoral votes. The Electoral College is not going to allow a third-party candidate to ever win. But doesn't mean they can't affect who does. That's what we call the spoiler effect. So if you want to go back to, say, maybe the year 2000, Ralph Nader was the Green Party candidate, won over 3 million votes, including thousands and thousands of people that voted for him in the state of Florida. If you guys remember, in 2000, it all came down to whoever won Florida would be the next president. And over 6 million votes cast, less than 600 determined the winner, and that was George W. Bush. Had Ralph Nader not been in the race, who knows? I mean, maybe those voters don't vote, but I guarantee you they're not voting for George W. Bush because that's the opposite end of the spectrum. Could have influenced the winner. You can go back to 1992. No Ross Perot. I don't know. Does Bill Clinton win? 1968. No George Wallace. I don't know. Does Nixon win after Wallace splits off the Democratic Party? 1912 again. No Teddy Roosevelt. I don't think we ever have a Woodrow Wilson as president. So they may not win, but they certainly can show historically they can have an impact on who does just by virtue of gaining votes and then deciding who maybe they would have voted for had that third party candidate not been in the race. So I know that was a lot of information. Thank you for hanging in there. Keep working hard, and we have a lot more to cover on political parties in the near future. I will see you soon.